Happy, kind people are born into happy families. Happy families are created in happy countries with happy people. During the years of repression in the Soviet Union, entire nations, including their elderly and children, their wise men and newlyweds, their teachers and poets, shepherds and blacksmiths, were exiled to uninhabited steppes. Entire nations, on command, became unhappy overnight, and families within them became unhappy. As a result, more often than others, unhappy and unkind people were born. At noon on January 4th, 1989, a slightly drunk first secretary of the District Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in one of Siberia's districts was sleeping and did not hear two burglars enter his apartment. They only took the owner's money and did not disturb him. At that moment, his wife returned, raised a commotion, and the awakened husband, seeing the knife, fell silent. The Tsar and God of the district, outraged by the audacity of the bandits, decided not to make a fuss and deal with them using his own strength and power. A few months later, on the night of a terrible incident, 3 robbers broke into the house of the Otsuev family in the Grozny region. The housewife did not want to take any risks and gave away all valuables herself. Later, she would tell that the gang leader did not allow his accomplice to rape her daughter. 2 more months passed. In the home of the Mastan family in the Moscow suburbs, 2 robbers broke in. The leader fired several times into the ceiling and walls. Later, an examination determined that the shots were fired from a Czech-made pistol. The frightened elderly homeowners handed over all their money and valuables. The homeowner had a heart attack. One of the robbers promised to call an ambulance as soon as they left. The call was recorded by the ambulance service. This meant that the gang leader kept his promise, surely understanding the risk. For 20 minutes, he tried to call for an ambulance from the nearest pharmacy for the very person they had just robbed. The pharmacy staff remembered the robber well. He had a high forehead and unusual eye shape. The police were amazed by the robber's audacity and the wide gestures. The next trace of the Czech pistol appeared in the Rostov region on June 6, 1989. 2 robbers broke into the house of the Shalumovs in the Rostov region, where they shot the head of the family and strangled his wife. To cover up the crime, the robbers set the house on fire. In the blaze, the bodies of the wife and a 1-year-old boy who burned to death remained. The funeral of the Shalumovs stirred the entire district. They swore that if the bandits were found and not sentenced to death, they themselves would execute them, no matter what. The gun casing from the crime scene was sent for examination, which linked the Rostov tragedy with the Moscow one and another that happened 6 months earlier in the Astrakhan region. At 2 o'clock in the night, a bandit attack was carried out on the Ivazov family. The husband and wife screamed. Without hesitation, the attackers shot the spouses, with the bullets extracted from their bodies being from the same Czech pistol. A few days before the tragedy, a person presenting himself as Vladimir Shpak, a correspondent, visited the Ivazov's neighbors. The neighbors remembered that the correspondent arrived in a car with a memorable number, 4334. The operatives checked and found that the real journalist, Shpak, was at home and used a new ID issued to replace a lost one. Soon in the neighboring region, a driver was detained with that car number, 4334. In the car, there were bullets from the same Czech pistol. The owner of the car testified that his wife's brother, Andrei, had fired the shots. Andrei, known as Andrei Lyubov, was declared a nationwide wanted person. In the fall of that year, several audacious robberies were committed in Leningrad. The style was familiar, but the bullets left in the robbed apartments were from a revolver. The bandits were always of different appearances. One tall, the other very young, with a Slavic appearance and very aggressive. On October 11 at 10 a.m., in her apartment, in front of guests and a housekeeper, a 75-year-old woman, Mikhailovna Yuryeva, was fatally wounded. She attempted to make a noise, and at the moment of the robbery, the senior bandit shot her. Yuryeva would die only in February, when the bandit who shot her was already arrested. The operation on Yuryeva was carried out by military academy doctors, as bullet wounds were rare at that time. A bullet from a nagant with a caliber of 7.62 millimeters was extracted from her body. The robberies happened one after another. They shared an elegance in the gang leader's actions. One of the victims, seeing that she was pregnant, received part of her stolen money back. The bandits always knew exactly where the hosts kept their belongings, their habits, and daily routines. This indicated meticulous, even somewhat old-fashioned preparation for the crimes. However, elegance did not prevent the bandit from using weapons. Usually, he fired at the ceiling just to scare. The remaining bullets from such shooting were sent to Moscow for a nationwide comparison. The shells and conclusions served as the main argument for linking all these attacks. At the crime scenes, there were almost no traces left. Based on witness testimonies, a composite sketch was created. A month and a half later, a 23-year-old tailor was shot in a cafe with a control shot to the head. The shooter turned to the room and calmly asked if anyone else wanted something. There were many witnesses to the crime. They described in detail a tall, elegant, and audacious bandit. After the murder, he calmly sat down at the table and finished his meal. The friends of the deceased swore to find the killer and take revenge. The Leningrad authorities were instructed to stop all taxis and check their plate numbers. The necessary car was found in one of the courtyards. In the trunk of the taxi, items taken by the bandits during recent robberies were found. The driver of the car was initially confused, but then revealed that throughout the fall, he had driven certain Andrei Lyubov and Roman. He last saw them preparing to leave. Andrei Lyubov was declared a nationwide wanted person. The Tashkent police were warned about possible dangerous activities but did not manage to prepare. At the beginning of 1990, Lyubov and Roman entered the house of the Brusinsovs on the outskirts of Tashkent. A fight broke out between the house's owner, recently released from prison, and Roman. Both drew weapons, and bullets hit Mrs. Brusinsova in the chest and head. The woman did not lose consciousness and saw how her son was killed and how a tall, dark-haired bandit finished off his wounded accomplice and took all his documents. Lyubov was found at the train station. He bought a ticket for the train from Tashkent to Moscow. He was easily captured, and during the search, a Nagant was seized. Handcuffed to a prisoner, Lyubov used his free hand to pull out a grenade from an inner pocket which had not been found during the search, and, pulling the pin with his teeth, armed it. After long negotiations, the police managed to convince Lyubov to move into the station building. He was handcuffed to the prisoner, following his commands, and burned documents. It was decided that a sniper would shoot Lyubov in the arm, and if he tried to use the grenade, one of the operatives would pull it into an empty corridor. The operation succeeded. The grenade turned out to be a training one. The detained Andrei Lyubov was found to be under nationwide search as Sergey Maduev, who had escaped from prison 13 months earlier. On his first day of arrest, he confessed to the murder of his accomplice, Roman Chernyshев. Adjustments for clarity and flow. Roman Chernyshев, a partner in the Leningrad and Rostov robberies, was already buried as an unknown person by this time. An exhumation was conducted, and the body of the former Leningrad student, Roman Chernyshев, was identified by his parents who arrived in Tashkent. At the beginning of the investigation, forensic experts performed a ballistics test on bullets from a revolver. They matched the bullets left in the robbed apartments. Sergey Maduev was sent to a solitary cell in the Leningrad prison, Kresty. He was charged with more than 60 crimes. The investigators were presented with a 35-year-old Sergey Alesin Maduev, the son of a Chechen father and a Korean mother, both born in exile. His parents were there only because they were Chechen and Korean. Sergey was raised sometimes by his mother, sometimes in foster homes when his mother was repeatedly jailed, leaving him unwanted and barely educated. Sergey had all the prerequisites to become a bandit. He became one, being a remarkable person. He could excel in many professions and became a highly professional con artist. Occasionally, looking at himself from the outside, he saw that he was a criminal and tried to make this image more pleasant. Perhaps that's why he would call an ambulance for the elderly and return part of the stolen goods to pregnant women. Not always having the opportunity to stay in hotels, Maduev had women in every city where he stayed, always giving them flowers and jewelry. He played with their children, and none of them have forgotten him to this day. Otherwise, he was cruel. The investigation into Maduev was conducted by a team led by a special investigator of the Prosecutor General's office. Throughout his adult life, Maduev had been free for only 17 months. His beautiful eyes with an unusual shape were recognized one after another by the wife of the first secretary of the Novosibirsk district, the first secretary himself, and several dozen other victims. Maduev readily gave testimony, signed interrogation protocols without reading them, and just as willingly betrayed his accomplices. Meeting with the investigators practically every day, he always appeared before them elegant, cheerful, and witty, never for a moment doubting that the death penalty would be his outcome. The investigation into Maduev was almost complete. It was decided to transfer him to Moscow. On May 3rd, 1991, Maduev was to be escorted from Kresty prison. At a specially designated place in the prison, while documents were being checked, Maduev pulled out a gun from his coat, fired at the wall, and demanded to be released. The gun was not a toy. Fragments of brick flew from the wall, and a bullet hole remained in the metal. Threatening the guards, Maduev ran down the corridor where Major Egorov intercepted him. Without hesitation, Maduev shot him. The major fell, but the guards, coming to their senses, raised the alarm. Maduev was apprehended. His escape was doomed as he ran towards the inner prison yard. Following all procedural formalities, criminalists were present during the surgery when the surgeons extracted the bullet from Major Egorov's body. The serial number on Maduev's revolver was filed off. But Maduev didn't know that in a hidden spot there was another. There was no doubt left. This was the same Nagant with which Maduev had committed crimes while free, with which Yuri was fatally wounded, and which was stored in the USSR prosecutor's office safe as key evidence. Only investigators had access to it, and they formed the circle of suspects. One of them had handed the gun to Maduev. The investigation of the escape was taken over by the KGB. Investigators met the same elegant Maduev, slightly less cheerful, but still ready to cooperate. Maduev understood that if, before the escape attempt, the death penalty was debatable, now, after wounding Major Egorov, it was almost a certainty. Therefore, Maduev began to give up KGB agents, one investigator after another. His sister was interrogated. She testified that in March, some woman had called her and asked her to get a gun for Sergey to facilitate his escape. There was only one female investigator, Natalia Vorontsova. Natalia Leonidovna Vorontsova had worked as an investigator for 11 years, achieving certain career heights. Female special investigators were rare. Maduev agreed to let the unsuspecting Vorontsova conduct his next interrogation, during which he would try to persuade her to confess. Maduev was, as always, elegant, cheerful, and carefully pretended not to notice the hidden camera. With this footage, the sister's testimony, and Maduev's own words, Natalia Vorontsova was fully exposed. She confessed immediately after seeing the video recording and testimonies. Initially, Natalia Vorontsova refused to explain anything, then said that a sense of justice drove her to the crime, while the investigation attributed other motives to her. Vorontsova never admitted to these other motives, though it could have softened the judges and reduced her sentence. The escape attempt delayed Maduev's trial for several years. During these years, he tried to escape twice more, once with a gun made from bread, and another time with a real MTT passed to him by a guard. The guard was arrested and claimed that Maduev had hypnotized him. People helped Maduev for their own gain. Maduev still desires freedom and doesn't know what awaits him. His freedom would be met by relatives of the killed, representatives of the community he didn't share his loot with, and wounded Major's colleagues. It was unclear whom they were protecting in the courtroom, free people from Maduev or Maduev from free people. Maduev has been in prison for 5 years. During this time, everything outside changed. Pistols can now be obtained by any teenager. Bandits have become bolder and different. He is a relic of the past, like notebooks with the USSR anthem on the cover. Sergey Maduev, the last bandit of the Soviet Union, was sentenced to be executed.